From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome again to Straight Talk. I'm Chris Willis in for Laurel Porter this week. Later in the show, we're going to hear from Portland Police Chief Mike Marshman, who is back on the job after being cleared in an internal investigation. But first tonight, something to think about the next time you flush the toilet. Portland is undertaking a project to capture a byproduct of raw sewage and use it to power city vehicles. The project was approved just in time for Earth Day this weekend. Here to discuss a number of environmental issues affecting our city and state is Chris Hagerbaumer. Chris is the Deputy Director at the Oregon Environmental Council, and the Council is a nonprofit group that advocates for solutions to Oregon's environmental challenges. Chris, thanks for being here on Straight Talk. We appreciate your time. And let's start with this project. Lofty Goals, the Bureau of Environmental Services has that big project, capturing methane and turning it into power. Give us an idea of how that works.
Well, after you flush the toilet, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? But what happens is when all of that raw sewage and other wastewater ends up in our wastewater treatment plants, it actually creates something called methane that goes up into our atmosphere. And unless you've been living under a rock, you recognize that we are actually warming our planet by adding what are called greenhouse gases to that atmosphere. It traps the heat like a blanket.
Sure, yeah.
So carbon dioxide, we've all heard of that, CO2, that's a hefty blanket. But methane, which is the byproduct of that wastewater treatment plant and other things, is like putting a wool blanket on the planet. In fact, it's 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So we want to trap it, and that's what the city is doing.
And by capturing that and trapping it, a dual purpose, I guess, you can convert it to power.
Exactly. So the great thing is that they're taking this methane and they're turning it into something called biogas. Biogas, in turn, can be used to power vehicles. It could also be put into the system like your natural gas that you're using in your home. So this is fantastic because the city has they've been utilizing almost 75% of this methane, but this is actually going to 100%, getting 100% of that methane out of our atmosphere and using it for a good purpose.
We heard from Commissioner Nick Fish, who's overseeing the Bureau, and talked about this project. We want to play some of that interview. He puts it kind of into layman's terms, calling this a triple win for Portland. Let's listen.
I can use all the fancy language, but what my son thinks is more appropriate is we're turning poop into power. We're using essentially human waste to create clean energy, which will then power our fleet and create a revenue stream for our ratepayers. And you know what? When you can protect the environment, when you can advance our climate action goals, and you can get a return for ratepayers, that's as good as it gets. So it's a very proud day for our city.
So he calls this a triple win, and it's a win for taxpayers, it's a win for the environment, and it's a win for the city as far as selling this gas back in different spots.
Absolutely. So the city can use this gas to power its own vehicles, but then it can sell it into the broader system that right now is looking for alternative fuels like this in order to clean up the environment.
Okay, and just quickly, and I don't want you to kind of set the finances, but they have said this would cost about $15 million for the city, but recapturing about $3 million a year. Eventually, this project would pay for itself and then be clean green, so to speak, fresh money after it's paid for. Is it possible, I guess my question to you is to sell this much natural gas once they've converted this methane?
There is a definite market. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is that we have in this state something called a clean fuels standard. The Clean Fuels Standard is basically holding the oil industry, the most profitable industry in the world, accountable for its greenhouse gas emissions. It is saying over 10 years, you need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from your fuel by 10%. And to do that, they can use cleaner fuels, including this biogas. So there will be an ever-increasing market for biogas.
Hugely encouraging. Okay, and then I wanted to just ask you this, because of the work you've done and the experience that you have, why is it important for us and for our city and our community and our county, for our elected leaders to take us in this direction. You know what I mean? I mean, a lot of local and regional governments aren't this aggressive, and we are. Why is that important?
We recognize that transportation is a major source of both these climate-changing pollutants, but even more current or current for our bodies is the impact that something like diesel has on our hearts, our lungs, especially our children who are exposed to diesel emissions. And so I think we have lawmakers who understand that we need to reduce these for people's health and well-being. That is the perfect segue into Senate Bill 1008. I believe, pending legislation right now that is in committee that deals with cutting diesel pollution. Tell us about that bill. So our organization, the Oregon Environmental Council, and many others around the state have said are asking our lawmakers, please start to accelerate getting rid of the oldest, dirtiest diesel engines. We find those in our trucks, in our garbage trucks, in the trucks that are running. I dare you, just take an hour along I-5, see how much smoke you still see being emitted out of these long-haul trucks. Also the construction equipment. We're in a construction boom, fantastic for our economy, but when you're using old diesel engines, again, it really impacts the health of those around us. We're telling the legislature, set a date by which all of that equipment gets cleaned up so that folks will do that. We talk about diesel pollution, carbon emissions, and we think of Oregon as here we are as clean and setting the standard for everybody. But when it comes to diesel pollution, I don't know if there's an exact number, but we're not doing well as far as the pollution that's emitted. And in fact, in Multnomah County, I believe the director of the EPA was here a while back and voiced the concerns and talked about retrofitting some of these big diesel engines and some of this big equipment. Is it that important to take care of that? And is it a result of regulations that have already been done in California, and a lot of these big trucks and a lot of this big diesel equipment is now making its way to Oregon? That's exactly the problem. Already we had a problem. Our equipment tended to be older and therefore dirtier. But California, it's ahead of the game. And so what that means is a company in California that can't use the old engines there is like, I can just sell them north. I can sell them to our neighbors in the north. Same thing up at the port of Tacoma, Seattle. They have also said, we don't want this dirty equipment on our property. Guess where that stuff gets sent? Oregon. So we're seeing an increase in older, dirtier engines. So our problem is getting worse, not better. Is this a matter of retrofitting some of that equipment, or is it a matter of, you know what, we need cleaner burning engines here? Or is it both? It's both. So if you want to address the dirty diesel problem, you can idle less. That's an easy thing. But you either could trap those emissions using something called a particulate emissions trap, or you can purchase a much cleaner engine that's also more efficient. That could be a clean diesel engine, or it could be moving to electricity or biogas as another example, what we were talking about earlier. Senate Bill 1008 was stripped down a little bit in committee. What was taken out of it, and what's going to be built back into it that is so important? So sadly, these clean air deadlines that I mentioned are what has gotten stripped out of the bill. Well, actually, even that not being able to sell dirty old engines into Oregon also got stripped out. It's really a shell. It says to the state, it authorizes the state to use these settlement dollars from Volkswagen. If folks have heard about, they were cheating, and Volkswagen has a huge settlement of which Oregon will get a part to help this problem. So almost everything got stripped out except for that settlement, and that's just not good enough. And this is a matter of getting opposition from some of these big construction companies, some of the developers that don't want new rules and regulations because of the cost it's going to incur on their business. And some of this, I believe, several $billion and locally maybe 70-some million from this Volkswagen settlement could be used to offset that money. Is that right? So the settlement will really help clean up actually first school buses. So those are what are transporting our kids. Emissions are even high inside of the school bus. So some of the dollars will be used for that, but then others will be open to help just to generally clean up engines across the state. So that's very important. Indeed, it's an expensive thing to upgrade, but if you have a deadline, you can build into your business plan, okay, I'm going to save this by and this by, I'm going to get a clean engine, it's better for my business because my employees will be healthier, and it's better for the community that I live in.
Yeah, so if you have that amount of time, you can budget accordingly. It also gets kind of specific as far as even idling times, right? Is that included in the bill?
So right now, there is a statewide rule around idling that just isn't really enforced.
Which is, not to interrupt, you don't want these diesel engines sitting there and idling over and over in minutes and hours, right?
Right. And so, unfortunately, a local government like the city of Portland or Multnomah County, they're not allowed under state rule to put in an ordinance that would be more protective. The bill would remove that ordinance. Of course, that got stripped out as well. So we are suggesting to folks, if you care about this issue, give your lawmaker a call, give your state senator a call. No question. Optimistic? I mean, you've been through this before. Are you optimistic this bill is going to get out of committee and find its way with the intent that it was written? I am optimistic that our lawmakers care about this issue and that they will do their best to this session. Yeah, I think that the community would agree too. Okay, 2 years ago, City of Portland, as we shift gears here, talked about their climate action plan. Renewable energy, I think, by the year 2050. However, on a federal level, we heard the new EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt last month say he doesn't think human activity is the primary cause of the global climate change. When that was said, especially here in Oregon, a lot of eyebrows raised, and across the nation, obviously. Is there concern from your level on this reaction and this statement from the federal level? Well, firstly, I can tell you that most Americans and most Oregonians understand science and believe and know that human beings are the human activity is what is adding an incredible number of greenhouse gas emissions. The Goldilocks of our planet is that atmosphere, but if it gets too hot, it's just not good for us. It's not good for Oregon. It's not good for anybody. Most people understand that. And unfortunately, our federal government is going backwards, which is why it's all the more incumbent on our state, on our local governments to take action, because ultimately it's good for our health, but it's also good for our pocketbooks. Yeah, you say most Oregonians, most people in the country understand this. Most Oregonians and most people in the country are not running the country on a federal level. So that said, does it change the strategy a little bit? Does it change how you handle things going forward with that opinion coming from the federal government and the EPA? I think it gives us all more resolve to do more to protect ourselves and to protect the future for our children. When we heard that, the topic of that statement was the climate action plan. We heard the city renew it. They want to be renewable energy completely, 100% by the year 2050. Another lofty goal, but one worth pursuing, right? Absolutely. So we can, fossil fuels, nobody knew when we first found oil in the ground or we first used coal that it was going to change our entire planet. And it worked just fine, but actually had a ton of negative health effects all along the way. We recognize that now. We recognize that we actually have great ways to power our country. Solar, wind, and others that actually are becoming cheaper than the old fossil fuel way of doing things. We can have good lifestyles with clean fuels, and it's the right move economically and environmentally. Standing in on that news conference, as I did last week with Deborah Kafori, the chair of Multnomah County, and Mayor Ted Wheeler, they admitted lofty goals, but agreed with what a great endeavor to take, and one that's going to benefit all of us. All right, Chris Hagerbaumer, thank you so much for your insight, and we certainly appreciate it, and hope a lot of people take it to heart on Earth Day. Thank you so much. Good to see you. All right, still to come, Portland Police Chief Mike Marshman. I spoke with him this week after he was cleared in an internal investigation about falsifying training records. Plus, you'll want to see our new debate segment, Left Jab, Right Hook. We're back with that and more in 2 minutes.